Okay, we're going to get started. I want to thank all of our attendees for joining us today. Our session is the Data Act webinar for agencies, and this is the second in a series on the Data Act and specifically on standards in data app implementation. I want to thank our partners in the program. The program is conducted through a partnership between ACT-IACT, which is the American Council on Technology Industry Advisory Council. ACT-IACT is an objective, ethical, and trusted forum where government and industry communicate, collaborate, and learn. Our second partner is the Association for Government Accountants, the AGA, which is the member organization for financial professionals in government. And then, of course, XBRL US, we are the National Consortium for the Business Reporting Standard. As we go through the program, we will be offering CPE credit. You're going to get one CPE credit for the program, so be sure to respond to the CPE questions, which will be asked at 2 different points during the program today. The CPE will be emailed to you in about 2 weeks. During the program, if you have any kind of technical problems, please send an email to us at support, S-U-P-P-O-R-T, at xbrl.us, and we'll do our best to get you back up and online. We'll be taking questions at the end of the program, but feel free to send us those questions throughout just by clicking on the Q&A link or the question link that you see on your console. You just type in your question and submit it, and then we'll get them and queue them up to take them at the end of the program. To get our program started, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Herschel Chandler. Herschel is a principal with IUI. Herschel has worked in the data science field for over 20 years. He has a real passion for the Data Act and for the power of open data. And he's a very frequent contributor on the Data Act GitHub. And so right now I'm going to turn it over to Herschel.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you everyone for joining us today for our second in a series of webinars on the Data Act. In our first webinar, we discussed the Data Act and XBRL, as well as the potential value of effective Data Act implementation beyond a simple compliance exercise. We discussed the value of enabling fact-based decisions through cross-governmental analytics while also streamlining the often cumbersome reporting process. You can watch that webinar on the XBRL US website under past events and replays. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers and agenda for the day. Our first speaker is Christina Ho with an update on Data Act implementation. Christina is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Accounting Policy and Financial Transparency at the Department of the Treasury. The Data Act names Treasury as a lead agency responsible for Data Act implementation. Christine and her team have been working tirelessly for over 15 months to develop a framework for implementation of a law that impacts all recipients of federal funds. The results of the work will soon be seen as agencies begin implementation. Neeraj Gupta joins the conversation to discuss Data Act deliverables for the non-technical among us. Neeraj, while on detail to the Department of Treasury, led various initiatives to implement the Data Act. Neeraj is a practice leader focused on transformational projects requiring both strong business and technology alignment. As a consultant, he worked with various federal agencies. Neeraj joined the federal government as part of the implementation team that stood up the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, where he built teams which implemented and now operate systems for the core mission of the Bureau. Neeraj was also the chief architect of CFPB's IT strategy, and alignment of business needs and technology capability across 7 major divisions, which today is used to manage an over $125 million technology portfolio. Jeff Steinhoff will discuss things we should consider when working to effectively implement the Data Act. Jeff is Executive Director of the KPMG Government Institute and a Managing Director in KPMG's Federal Advisory Services practice. In 2008, Jeff retired from the Government Accountability Office after a 40-year federal career. For the last 9 years of his federal career, he served as Assistant Comptroller General of the United States. He headed GAO's largest audit unit with responsibility and oversight of financial management and auditing issues across the federal government. He was a principal architect of the CFO Act of 1990 and of the Federal Financial Management Improvement Act of 1996. So it occurs to me that he knows a little something about implementing financial regulation across government. Mark Montoya works in data strategy for the Division of Insurance and Research at the FDIC. Mark is responsible for directing complex statistical analysis on banking industry trends and conditions. Mark has contributed to the Financial Stability Board's Global Legal Entity Identifier Initiative and has co-authored papers concerning legal entity identifiers. Mark was one of the original founders of the Central Data Repository, an XBRL-based financial reporting collection system shared by the Federal Reserve Board, the Office of Comptroller of Currency, and the FDIC. Mark has been involved with XBRL since 2001. Mark will offer an FDIC case study in data mapping to existing agency systems. He'll then discuss the inherent challenge in data mapping and reporting for multiple systems, data quality, with another FDIC case study. Michelle Savage from XBRL US will complete our conversation with a final case study on data quality from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Michelle Savage is Vice President of XBRL US and manages the education, marketing, communications, and outreach efforts of the organization. Within the XBRL US community of the AICPA, Ms. Savage served as a Vice Chair of the Steering Committee as well as the Chair of the Adoption Working Group. Michelle has been intimately involved in developing strategies for XBRL adoption in the U.S. So we have a jam-packed webinar for you today. Let's start off. Christina, how are we doing with Data Act implementation?
Thank you, Herschel. We are, as you said, working tirelessly and making a lot of good progress. And I hope in the next few minutes to give you guys an overview of the progress we've made since the webinar, the first webinar, which was a little bit after mid-July, so it's about 2 months ago. Just to reiterate from the beginning, our strategy for implementation is to minimize burden on the agency and costs, and also maximize the strategic value for stakeholders, including federal and non-federal stakeholders. That means that we need to be able to provide data that's reusable and reliable, which led to the formulation of our data-centric approach, which my boss, Dave, first introduced it back in December last year at his first hearing on the Hill. So in this past 2 months, we actually published version 0.5 of the schema, which included a war-level data element as well. At the end of July, we have also issued additional guidance to agencies on the data element. We are continuing to iterate on the data element guidance as well as the schema so that we can incorporate the All 57 data standard, which was also finalized recently at the end of August. And we want to continue to iterate on that and also eventually include not just the 57 data element that we had to set data standards for, but all of the data elements that are currently reported on USA spending, which is about over 200 of them. I mentioned earlier that we finalized all the 57 data standard at the end of August, and that was a really significant milestone, and we actually received great accolade from the Hill as well. And then we made some great progress on our implementation pilot, which was really intended to help us to work out all of the individual component of the broker and the data-centric approach. I know Neeraj is going to talk a lot more in detail on that. We actually work with some real data and flesh out the approach further, and provided some not only the screencast that you're going to see later, but also developer guide that we have published to help people to start looking at our code and the documentation. So those are all the things that we have done in the past 2 months, and we will continue to be very busy trying to get to more information and get them out to the agencies. And we're also working very closely with the agencies on their implementation plan. So there's a lot going on, and I'm really excited that we continue to have interest from agencies and great participation on some of our own internal workshops and meetings. But I'm very appreciative of all the group XBRL and FDIC AGA putting webinars like this that helps us to continue to move forward. So I'll turn it over to Herschel.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Christina. It's good to hear you've done a lot in the 2 months since we last spoke. So good to hear all the good progress. So Neeraj, I understand you just are finishing up a detail over at Treasury, helping out with Data Act, and you're going to tell us a little bit about deliverables from a non-technical perspective. Neeraj?
Yes, thank you, Herschel, and good afternoon, everyone. This is Neeraj Gupta, and I'll spend the next few minutes talking about this item called the broker, which is a tool to help translate data that agencies have in their own specific format into the Data Act schema, which is a more standard representation of that same data. So if you could go to the next slide. I'll walk the team through this slide, and then we'll spend a couple of minutes watching a demo of the broker, and then we'll come back to the slide to finish it off. So from a deliverable standpoint, if you look at the top, the number one deliverable for agencies was an inventory today, which is basically saying most of this data exists within agencies and agency systems today. So do an inventory, understand which systems that data lies in, get down to the granular level, such as systems name, table name, column headers, to that granular level, so you know out of those 57 required elements, which systems they reside in and where in those systems they are. The second piece is to map that to the Data Act schema, which Christina mentioned 0.5 has been released. That schema is the standard representation of that same data, but just normalized across the government. An example of this would be, a very simple example would be, you may keep a date in your system as month, day, year, and the rest of the government may keep it slightly differently. We're going to take one particular view of it, which may be month, day, year, and everyone translates into that format. That's a very simple example of a mapping. Another more complex example is where you may have two data elements in your internal systems that have to be joined together to equal the standard representation for whatever business needs you have. That's the mapping process. And then that data will be provided and merged with other sources of data like SAM, which contains some information about vendors, and eventually published out to the future of USA spending. Along that process, there's validations, which you see at the bottom, a validation tool, which would say this data has inconsistencies here, and it will flag it for the agencies to react to. So the steps between 2, 3, and the validation is what we're calling the broker, which is a tool which translates data from an agency into the Data Act schema and runs some validation tools on it. So I'll pause there, and Michelle and Herschel, maybe we could go to the video now, which demonstrates the broker in its current prototype form that does some of these steps.
Okay, let's jump over to the pilot's prototype website. This is the minimum viable product that I talked about earlier. It's not a production-ready website. Rather, it's something that we built so that we might better understand how the Data Act submission process might work. So when you come here, it's one simple page. You'll see 4 places to upload files. And of course, these correspond to the 4 files that we talked about in the process diagram. So I'm going to go ahead and get these ready for upload. And while I'm doing that, I want to say that we are between data pools with the SBA. So I am running this demo with some dummy data, and it's going to generate a lot of error messages. And that's great to show how the website works, but it doesn't reflect the true state of SBA's data, which is actually in pretty good shape. So I have chosen 3 of the 4 files to upload, and the first step is validate the data. So I'm going to click this button here, and for each of the 4 files, I'm going to get some information about how everything checked out. In the appropriations file, I can see that some of the fields weren't valid. So if you click View Error Details, you get more information about what is happening. So each table here represents a row in the CSV file that did not pass validations. And it drills down into a bit more detail. For each row, we show the specific data element that didn't pass validations and what the problem was. So we can see that for these fields, we have some required data that just wasn't there. Same with row 1. So this is good information so that you can go back and understand which row in the CSV caused a problem, but we also want to make it as easy as possible for people to go back to the source system and make the correction. So whatever information we have that will help people track that down, we'll put here. In this case, part of the appropriations account number. It works the same way for the other files. So here is object class program activity. These same missing fields show up in the error report. Now this file has a little bit more specificity in that it includes program activity and object class information. So we put that here too, just to help people, again, track back to the source. The award file I did not upload, so we just get a missing file message here. So the validations are pretty straightforward. The next step is to take validated data and convert it to the Data Act standard. That feature is not yet built into the website, but we do have it working as a command line utility, which I can show. So this Python script right here is going to run, and what it's doing is it's going to take the 4 validated CSV files that we've been working with. You should see some familiar names by now, and it's going to ingest them, and it's going to merge them with the Data Act standard, so to speak, and convert that CSV information into standardized information that is represented in a format called XML. We'll see what that looks like in just a minute. And I have told it to write out those XML files to a folder called data/demo data/XML. I can see here the demo data XML folder now has a lot of .xml files, which is good. And these file names and some of the data that we're going to see certainly reflect the fact that we're using this dummy data. But it is a first look at how standardized Data Act data might look. So clearly there's some work to be done, but this is a great first pass.
Just a couple of points to note. One was SBA has been a partner agency as we've been developing the prototype broker. Becky Swaker, who you heard speaking on the video, as part of the 18F team, who has been also assisting as part of the broker development and doing terrific work. You saw at the end where some data was being translated to the XBRL XML format. That piece still needs to be baked back into the web interface, so it's much more user-friendly. That's work that is slated to be done. But I wanted to highlight a couple of other things. One is, at this point, the biggest deliverables for agencies is to understand your data sources, and if you're not capturing data that's required by Data Act, to start planning around how to start capturing that data. For data you already have and you understand where it is, you can simply extract it and translate it through this broker tool, but if there's data you're not capturing, that is something you will have to plan for. With that, Herschel, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thanks, Neeraj. I appreciate that. I'm happy to see it actually coming to life. So with that, we've heard about the framework that Treasury's been putting together. We've seen some of the pilot work that we've done. Now we're ready to actually start implementing. And for that, we'll turn it over to Jeff that will talk to us a little bit about some things we should consider before we start implementation. Jeff?
Thank you, Herschel. Good afternoon. For all those in government, thank you so much for your service. Next slide. In the words of Thomas Jefferson, whenever the people are fully informed, they can be trusted with their own government, while transparency and accountability are just 2 elements of trust. In a November 2014 analysis, the Pew Research Center found that public trust in government to do the right thing always or most of the time had gone from a high of 77% in 1964 to 24% in 2014. Michelle, next slide. Movement to the CFO Act has been movement to the Data Act has been a 25-year journey. When people talk about the CFO Act, they immediately think about audited financial statements. I've heard it oftentimes referred to as the end game, but that's certainly not the case. The end game is really covered in 3 provisions. It's really focused on the systematic measurement of performance, the development of cost information, and the integration of systems budget, program, and accounting. We have moved through in this past 25 years through FFATA, which the Data Act expanded. We've moved through the Recovery Act, which called for open government reporting, and we have had a number of portals. Now we move to the Data Act today, and it essentially covers all spending, and it was passed in part because the quality of information in USA spending was found not to be where people wanted to be, really. Next slide. 90% of the world's data has been created in the past 2 years. Stunning number. The Data Act challenge is to draw insight and value from data. The 2012 World Economic Forum declared data an economic asset, like currency or gold. Let's look at the data landscape here, post the Data Act. At the core in teal, common data elements will unite information from different systems and reports. Moving to the blue in the left corner, spending data from different systems and reporting streams will become consistent and comparable, leading to greater value for decision-making and oversight. Moving to the red or the purple in the right corner, a common data element format, built-in analytic tools to integrate data from various systems will drive improved data quality. And it'll give you more value, really, in analyzing for fraud, waste, and abuse, looking for those things that don't look quite right. Moving to the bottom left in green or lime, the flow of funds from appropriation to expenditure will be available on usspending.gov in a machine-readable format. And in orange at the bottom right, checkbook-level payment data will be available and searchable by agency, appropriation, account, object class, grant, contract, and grantee and contractor, and hopefully someday by program or some other breakout that aligns very clearly with mission results, and that would complete the entire circle. Next slide. It will be imperative to be ready for this next journey and have put together here some benchmark questions to help folks gauge whether they're ready or not and to guide what needs to be done to, in fact, prepare. Next slide. Can you answer yes to these benchmark questions today? First, are you collaborative? Are you sharing insights? Are you sharing solutions? Or do you sit on the sidelines and wait to be told what to do? Found in the implementation of the CFO Act, there were agencies that were out front, and they benefited the greatest. They got to the finish line much quicker, and they got greater value. Are you focused on going beyond basic compliance? View basic compliance as the floor, the bare minimum. And you don't want to be in a compliance mode. You want to be in a mode of broad transformational change that makes a difference. Have you developed day-to-day working relationships with Christina, OMB, agencies you do business with, state and local, other grantees that you're working with? Next slide. Moving to the data. This requires a lot of hard work. You know now what the data elements are. As Christina mentioned, expect Treasury to build on those. Can you assess what data is relevant today and where it needs to come from in your systems, or who it needs to come from? Don't expect 100% or even close to it at first. But in the end, it's all about the data. Can you link the data to your audited financial statements? That's explicitly required by the Act. Is it complete, accurate? You know, GAO found significant shortfalls to the data quality in USA spending under FFATA. So you have to make this happen, really. It's not a compliance exercise. It's an exercise to moving to broader transformational change. Next slide. Moving to the technology piece. Can you efficiently and effectively obtain the data? If you have to resort to data calls, heroic efforts, offline work to develop the information to report to USA spending, it's not going to work real well for you. Have you put in place, or are you working toward developing analytic tools to enable data-centric reporting? And what about information security? Is this information protected so that someone can't come in and change what you have in fact reported? When we talk about the business strategy and governance side, be innovative. This is not just about public reporting. This is about improving decision-making and oversight, to looking at the systematic measurement of performance. Look at your gaps. I think Christina mentioned that before. Do it now. This is not something new. The Data Act amended FFATA, so there's been a requirement, at least for grants and contracts, to have done this since 2006. Do you have a communication strategy in-house and with stakeholders, including the Hill? Do you have proactive working relationships with your Inspector General? They have a lot to offer. They've used forensic tools for decades now. They analyze data and big data. So again, they're not there just to critique and come through and say what needs to be improved. They can be a very important tool in providing their best thinking. Next slide. Moving to the process side. Do you have process to ensure the required data is pulled together on time in an accurate fashion? Again, it's all about the data. Do you have the business rules to adjust your systems or adjust the processes you're now following to meet the current data standards and a process for addressing any subsequent refinements? And finally, people. You've got to have people with the right skills to analyze budgeting and spending information, to map the data, to be able to look at structures and standards. You have to have the right leaders. And they must be fully empowered to lead. They can't be buried, let's say, in one function. We're talking about cultural change. Harvard University says cultural change can take 7 years. It will take time, but everybody must be on board. This can't be viewed as the CIO's job or the CFO's job. Essentially, a lot of this information comes from programmatic systems. And finally, do you have training? Does everyone understand? At every level, it's going to be very important that everybody's in the boat, oaring in the same direction. So thank you very much today. And now back to Herschel.
Hey, Jeff, thank you so much for those thought-provoking questions. A lot of things to consider when we start thinking about implementation. And thank you also to all of those that are submitting questions online. I see that we're starting to get a queue that we'll address at the end of this webinar. And while we're talking about questions, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle to ask us those challenging CPE questions. Michelle.
Thanks very much, Herschel. Okay, now for your difficult CPE question here. I'm going to put this up on the screen. Okay, you should be able to see that now. And the question is specifically about the Data Act definition. So if you can click on the radio buttons that you see there, and that will record your response. And remember, you do need to record your response in order to get your CPE credit at the end. So we're going to wait just a minute here while we get all our answers in. Okay, we're getting close to everyone voted here. We're going to ask 2 questions right now, and then we'll have 2 questions a little bit later in the program. Okay, I'm going to close the polls in just a second here. Just want to make sure we have everyone responding who needs to. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now. All right. Now we're going to go to our next question, which is about the broker. What is the broker? And you just heard about the broker from Neeraj, so hopefully you'll be able to respond to this question.
Sorry, Michelle, can you repeat the question?
Yes, the question is, what is the broker? And you should see the 3 different options up on the screen, so just click on the option that you think is most appropriate. To get CPE credit, the accuracy of the response is not critical, but we just need to be sure that, that you responded to it. And while we're waiting for people to respond, just a reminder to please send in your questions, as Herschel was saying, and by clicking on the question link, just typing in your question and then submitting it, and then we'll get to it at the end of the program. Okay, great. I'm going to close this poll now because it looks like we've got 90% voted. Okay. So thank you. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Herschel.
Thanks, Michelle, and I hope everyone did well on those questions. So next up is Mark Montoya. He's going to talk to us a little bit about how to do the mapping, how to map to existing agency systems, and showing a couple of FDIC case studies along with Michelle. Mark, take it away.
Thank you, Herschel. Next slide, please. Okay, today I'd like to cover how FDIC maps items from the call report to existing agency systems. In this part of the presentation, I will cover 3 areas. First is the call report and how its components for key elements, not only data quality and validation, but also fundamental components for mapping to internal systems. Second are how financial item mappings propagate throughout FDIC internal processes, from data collection to data aggregation. And then I'll close with how the call report is being reused for downstream application development. Next slide, please. The call report taxonomy contains components used for financial data collection, analysis, and aggregation. The first component is the use of financial reporting forms. The call report taxonomy includes 2 financial reports. The first report is for banks with domestic offices only, and the second is for banks with both domestic and internal offices. Included with the financial report forms are report instructions which provide additional guidance for banks. The second component are data quality checks. Data quality checks allow banks to pre-validate their data before filing with the FDIC. This ensures the data being received from the banks are of higher quality and include very few errors before being stored for aggregation. The third component is the use of a common set of financial terms. This common set of financial terms are the foundation to the call report and many additional Federal Reserve and FFIEC financial reports. The Common set of financial terms are found throughout agency financial reports, report instructions, data quality checks, and provide the framework for mapping call report taxonomy to existing agency systems. Next slide, please. The common set of financial terms are defined in a data dictionary called the Microdata Reference Manual, also referred to as the MDRM. The MDRM is a dictionary of micro and macro data collected from banks and is maintained by the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. Terms contained in the dictionary are shared between the FDIC agencies. The MDRM dictionary does not contain actual data, but contains attributes of financial data. The MDRM is actually a data dictionary of metadata. The metadata is information that describes data. For example, let's use total assets from a bank holding company report. The MDRM defines the bank holding company data series as DHCK, and total assets is 2170. The financial item 2170 is defined as total assets across all financial reporting forms for the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, and the OCC. The financial item becomes unique when appended with a data series. For example, DHCK 2170 is total assets for a bank holding company, and RCON 2170 is domestic total assets for a call report. The MDRM numbers are used across agency back-end systems and databases. The MDRM numbers are defined across reporting forms for data collection. Used in data quality checks for analysis and validation, the numbers are also used in downstream systems for data aggregation and publication. Next slide, please. The MDRM are primary identifiers used in mapping to agency systems. This can be seen in data extracts from the FDIC Central Data Repository, which stores call report data. Each agency creates, maintains, and schedules extracts from this data repository. All extracts contain the MDRM numbers. Separate from the shared extract function of the Central Data Repository, agencies share a common data exchange format. The shared exchange framework is XML-based with a secure transmission infrastructure housed at each agency. The XML exchange is based on a common MDRM dictionary and is used to import data into each agency's corporate database. Next slide, please. So as you can see, there's a theme throughout my presentation on mapping to agency systems, the use of a common set of financial terms. The MDRM in my area of data management is beneficial as it is found throughout all aspects of FDIC's data management lifecycle. MDRM numbers are found in non-public data collections such as Dodd-Frank collections and other supervisory data collections. MDRM numbers are used to distribute data to other federal regulatory agencies such as the U.S. Treasury and the World Bank, and also with data that FDIC aggregates for research and economic purposes. The most publicly known use of aggregated data is found in the quarterly bank profile that the FDIC's chairman uses in quarterly press conferences to present the state of the banking industry to the public. Next slide, please. The Central Data Repository provides a set of tools for agencies and software vendors to develop software solutions using call report data. The Central Data Repository offers a set of services for web-connected applications. Developers can program applications to automatically download current and prior period call report data. Third-party aggregators such as S&L Financial and Bank Trend use web services to provide call report data to their clients. FDIC uses web services to programmatically download call report data to an internal service broker that offers call report data and also other financial data sets to internal FDIC developers for use in applications. FDIC has developed an examiner toolkit suite that uses the same web services to provide bank examiners access to call report data in real time during a bank examination. Web service allows direct access to call report data and taxonomies without the need for developers to reinterpret the data. Now I'd like to present a case study on call report data validation. Next slide, please. In this session, I'd like to present the call report validation process and the validation process, how it influences the data quality being submitted by banks each quarter. I will cover the framework and structure of the call report validation process and analysis, and close with additional call report guidance and rules. Next slide, please. The call report is a structured financial report. It contains basic balance sheet and income statements, but also includes subschedules. The call report is not a free-flow form with a lot of narrative. Any narrative in the call report are defined by text box. Banks cannot add or include any additional financial terms in the call report submission. Call report software enforces this rule. In a bank, if a bank decides to modify or change a call report outside their reporting software, the Central Data Repository System will reject the submission. Instructions for filing the call report are explicit with very little room for interpretation by the bank. The FDIC Reports Task Force defines and releases call report instructions for industry to review each year. This gives the banking industry time to review and comment on any new or changed items. But with the onset of Dodd-Frank and the new capital requirements for small banks, there has been an increase in interpretation and correspondence between the banks and our FDIC analysts. Next slide, please. There are multiple levels of data validation for a given call report cycle, each level providing validation to ensure data meets FDIC data quality rules. It is important to note that this presentation is describing data validation as a process between the data being submitted in a system. But what may not be obvious is that there is a level of quality assurance defined in the call report taxonomy that is sent to software vendors for incorporation in their software. Taxonomy provides a means for the FDIC agencies to ensure reporting requirements are interpreted correctly by the software. So prior to the start of each call report cycle, FDIC develops and sends reporting requirements in the form of XBRL taxonomies to software vendors. Vendors incorporate the new requirements into their software. If any issues are found during the review process, agency staff will make corrections and publish a new taxonomy for vendors to review and test. This process occurs until no errors are found. Using reporting software, banks validate their call data prior to submission. Certain data must pass prior to submission. Other data may be submitted with errors, but these data must be accompanied with a text explanation on why the data is erroneous. When banks are satisfied with its call report, the bank will submit the report to the Central Data Repository where the same set of data quality checks are applied. An email message with any error messages are sent back to the bank for correction. If no corrections are discovered, the bank will receive an email message stating that their submission is pending analyst review. Next slide, please. This diagram shows the interaction between the CDR system, software vendors, and banks. FDIC sends reporting requirements to software vendors who incorporate call report requirements into their software. The banks then pre-validate their data using vendor software prior to submitting to CDR. Satisfied with their data, the banks then submit directly to CDR, where call analysts, FDIC analysts, and banks correspond on the validity of the bank's financial data. Next slide, please. Here are some key points of the call report data validation. Validity checks are math checks like simple summations and subtractions of current and prior quarter data. Validity checks must pass before the bank submits their call report. Quality checks ensure data meet certain tolerances and the data are consistent between quarters. A bank may fail a quality check but must provide a text explanation for the failed data. Reportability rules are a set of questions a bank must answer based on their current and prior quarter financial and structure information. The bank only reports items that are required based on how the bank answers the reportability questions. Reportability rules are like filters for bank data. Instead of a bank submitting all 2,500 call report items, the bank submits only a subset based on the reportability answers. The Central Data Repository and software vendors use the same taxonomy and data quality checks. This ensures that both the CDR system and the bank software are in sync. Next slide, please. So in closing, there's the key points to take away from this presentation on data quality and validation. The bank is in charge of its own data. Validity data checks must pass prior to submission to CDR. Quality checks quality failures must be accompanied with a text explanation, and a second level validation happens at the CDR system. So I'll now like to turn it over to Michelle Savage, who will present a use case on SEC validation. Michelle?
Mark, thanks very much. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about the SEC program. And this slide just shows a quote actually from the original SEC proposal for XBRL for public company reporting. And basically, the goal of the SEC program that was mandated in 2009 was to make financial information easier for investors to analyze, but also to assist in automating regulatory filings and business information processing. Validation is a really key component of this entire program. And there are a number of reasons why getting data right, getting the quality of the data right is important to the SEC program, and why it's somewhat challenging. First and foremost, the U.S. GAAP standard, the accounting standard itself, allows for a fair amount of flexibility. Public companies that report can use unique items. For example, a company may have a particular business unit that they want to report sales for. They can actually create that and use that in their public company reporting. When companies report their financial information, the presentation of that information in the HTML document can vary. So the presentation can vary substantially from company to company, and that makes it even more difficult for someone who's consuming that data in an automated fashion. Third, all of the text within the financial statement must be tagged as well. There's a lot of text and there's a lot of facts that are reported within that text, and the SEC requires that not only must the text be tagged, but that the individual fact values within the text must also be tagged. So that makes it very, very flexible. Secondly, and that also leads to the fact that the U.S. GAAP taxonomy is quite large. There are over 20,000 elements in that taxonomy, and there's lots of different interrelationships within those reporting items. 9,000 companies report every quarter to the SEC in U.S. GAAP. So that's three quarters with one annual filing every year. So it's a huge volume of data that's being reported. And what that means is that the quality of the data can be challenging to achieve. So there are a number of validations that are available for U.S. GAAP reporting in XBRL. And this diagram shows the XBRL validation stack and how it works. When you look in the upper left table in blue, you can see the different organizations that create the corporate filing. There are issuers and preparers, there are the accounting firms that they work with, there are the filing agents and other service providers that act as actual XBRL preparers. And these different organizations and individuals, they rely on three types of validation every time an SEC report in XBRL format is created. And this is what you see on the bottom of the table. So if we kind of start from the bottom, the base case validation is specification validation, and this is an automated check that ensures that the XBRL file conforms to the correct technical specification. Then on top of that, in pink, you see SEC Edgar Filer Rules validation. This checks some SEC requirements that are necessary to the XBRL document itself. And then on top of that, you see data quality rules. And these are checks for certain business rules that apply to using the U.S. GAAP taxonomy itself. So these three validations are designed to test XML validation, data consistency, the accuracy of the content, and ultimately they also ensure that the SEC file will be accepted into the Edgar system. So let's take a look at each one. Specification validation, as I said, looks at the underlying code in the XML document that contains the company's reported financials. It confirms that the technical spec is correct. This validation is maintained by XBRL International, which is a global organization that's responsible for maintaining and expanding on the XBRL specification. The second form of validation is Edgar validation. This is developed and maintained by the regulator, by the Securities and Exchange Commission. This includes syntactical and some business rules about the way that the document is structured. This gives a couple of examples of the Edgar Filer rules. So the first example that you see up there is that filers must use one of the taxonomies as specified. So every year there is a new release of the taxonomy. The SEC requires that certain taxonomies be used, and usually it's the current release of the taxonomy and the previous. So they give you 2 years of taxonomy releases to use. So that's one of the rules that can be automated, and every XBRL file is checked for that. The second rule you see here explains that certain concepts have to be reported in every XBRL document. And these are things such as company name, the CIK number, which is the company-specific identifier set by the SEC, reporting year, the category of the filer. There are such as, in this case, the large accelerated filer. So these are items that have to be included in every XBRL document that's received. And these are part of the automated validation rules set by the SEC. But there are still other complexities in how the data is reported. So, we've looked at some of the issues like the size of the taxonomy, the flexibility of US GAAP reporting. These have resulted in a lot of errors in the XBRL data that we see. And this chart shows the kinds of errors that we at XBRL US have identified. The most significant volume of problems that we see comes from when companies work with financial tables. We term these errors invalid access member errors, and they comprise about 34% of all the errors that we're seeing. The second most common problem we see comes from signage problems, companies reporting data points as negative when it should be positive or positive when it should be negative. And we also see that there are a lot of problems, about 9.7% of problems are values that were required in the filing but were not submitted. So because of these errors, a group of XBRL preparers and data consumers have come together to establish business rules about how companies should work with the taxonomy. And that set of rules we call data quality rules. So this group of rules is established and maintained by industry, and they provide unambiguous guidance on how to tag financial data, and we make these rules freely available on our website. So that gives you a sense for the types of rules and the types of validation that are available for SEC reporting, which, as you can see, is quite comprehensive. So the data quality rules are basically assertions that can be run over one element or multiple sets of elements. And some examples of these rules are that certain elements must always be negative or must always be positive. Certain element values should be equal within a document. Document and entity information dates should match the document period end date. Or they could be rules such as element A must always be less than or equal to or greater than or equal to element B. So these are the types of validation rules that we can put into place that help companies create essentially better quality data. And at the end of the day, the result is that public company filings that rely on these three different sets of validation rules will ultimately have better quality. They'll be accepted by the SEC system, they'll meet compliance, they'll be more consistent, more accurate, and essentially easier for a preparer to check their own work, and easier for data consumers to ingest that data. The last thing I wanted to mention is XBRL US is developing a set of tools that we're going to be posting on our XBRL US GitHub that will allow users to actually start using some of this corporate data much more easily. And we're going to be posting some APIs that can be used to extract XBRL corporate data. We're posting spreadsheets, both in Excel and Google Sheet versions of these spreadsheets that will allow you to perform company analysis and to customize those company analysis. And we'll be sending information on that out to all of the attendees once those are prepared and ready to go. So with that, before we move on to onto our summary, I'm going to ask our final poll questions for the day. And the first poll question is, validation can be used in a structured data implementation to do what? And so I'm posting these polls up here. Hopefully you can see this. So please just take a few minutes to look at the poll questions and record your response here. Okay, I'm going to close the poll in just a minute here, and we'll have one final poll for the day. And closing that poll, and we'll go to our final poll for the day. The XBRL standard is not used in the U.S. today for which of the following situations? So if you can respond to this question, which of the following situations is XBRL not currently used for in the U.S. today? Okay, I'm going to close the poll in a minute here, so if everyone can just record their final vote. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now, and I'm going to turn it back over to Herschel. Herschel?
All right, thanks, Michelle. Thanks for those questions. So today we've received an update on the implementation of the Data Act. We've heard some very valuable considerations as you begin your own implementation and learn from existing case studies at the FDIC and SEC in their XBRL journey. The key message I hear is that this is much more of a people and process challenge than a technology challenge. Early and ongoing communication is key to effective implementation. So Jeff posed some good questions to get the conversation started, but now it's time for your questions. So please go to GoToWebinar and post your questions. We already have several, and first one is on data quality. Mark, you mentioned that there's challenges and the importance of data quality. Well, it's a topic that's near and dear to data analytics people like me. The quality of fact-based decisions is connected to the quality of the underlying data. This implies the need to manage or govern quality in an ongoing way. How did you do it, and also what does FFIEC stand for?
Yeah, so the FFIEC stands for the Federal Financial Institution Examination Council, and it consists of 5 regulatory agencies: the Federal Reserve Board, FDIC, Office of Comptroller of Currency, CFPB, and the NCUA. Sorry about that. I assume that everybody understands my acronym. And secondly, from a data quality standpoint, like you said, it mainly deals with people and processes and not technology. Much of the information from a data quality standpoint happens outside the data collection aspect and the actual collection system. So like rules from FASB and GASB come down upon individual data quality working groups we have between the agencies. And we talk about that, and it's ongoing. It's not just one-off, one bat, we send out the taxonomy, it's done. It's an ongoing process. It happens every quarter as new stuff comes down the line, like Dodd-Frank and a lot of these capital requirements, as I mentioned in the presentation. A lot of that data quality and a lot of the discussion happens outside of the system, but it's ongoing, and we make sure that the data quality is ensured through the taxonomy and eventually the process. But a lot of it happens outside. And it's constant communication. I thought it was a headache with 3 agencies, but I imagine a lot of the government out there, what the Treasury has to deal with the Data Act, can be more intense.
All right, thanks, Mark. Another question we have. I work for a local government, a county government, and I'm trying to determine what, if anything, the Data Act will require me to report to whom and when. Christina, I think this is a question for you guys.
Sure, thanks, Herschel. The Data Act does not introduce any new reporting requirements for the recipients, which the local government will be considered a recipient. So hopefully that's good news. There is a requirement within Data Act regarding running a pilot, which is Section 5 pilot that OMB is leading to test ways to reduce recipient reporting burden. So to the extent that you would like to participate in that and provide feedback, I think that would be something that would be very beneficial. But Data Act does not have any new reporting requirement for the recipient.
Thank you, Christina. Another question we've got, is Treasury going to develop any canned GOTS, I guess government off-the-shelf, training programs for agencies to disseminate throughout the ranks?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you repeat that?
The question is Treasury going to develop any canned training programs for agencies to disseminate throughout their ranks? It sounds like they're asking if you're going to create some sort of canned training that agencies can share with their people around the Data Act.
Okay, so let me talk about what we have been doing. We have been conducting workshops with agencies, and we've actually done 2 rounds of that. And those are normally within each workshop we have no more than 3 agencies because we want to make sure that it's not too big that people cannot ask specific questions that are really specific to their agencies. We also have offered to do some individual agency workshop that's with one agency. We've done that actually with one at this point. We also, some of the things that we've been doing are really intended to help the agency to communicate the approach. For example, the screencast, that's kind of like a YouTube video where people can replay that because not everybody can attend the workshop. We also are doing all of our development work related to the pilot using really public, the tools that allow the public and anybody to follow and to look at. Essentially, it's really developing in the open. So our hope is to really be able to share as much information as possible. We also, the Treasury has a PMO office that actually disseminate a lot of the communication to all the agency senior accountable officials. To the extent that if there are some training that agency need that are very targeted and specific, we're happy to do that, and we're open to that suggestion.
Great. Thank you, Christine. And with that, we're already a couple of minutes over, so I'd like to turn it back over to Michelle to close us out.
Herschel, thanks very much. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today, all of our attendees and all of our speakers.